will start our walk through Smith Mills as it emerged into the latter part of the 20th century. Many changes have been made since the original sleepy little village, mostly built in the 1800s, after many of the mills had already disappeared. The land we are standing on was where a number of the old mills were located. A fulling mill, an oil mill, sawmill, and a grist mill for grinding grain, with many businesses surrounding them. If it were not for the generosity of the Szymanski family, the backing of many of the town departments, and most of all, the town meeting vote for a canoe launch and park, and the most helpful grant from the Buzzards Bay Coalition, it would not have been possible for us to stand here today and look at the stone supports that remain long after the footbridge had rotted away, seeing the ducks floating on the silent, flowing water, where soon we hope to see people enjoying launching their canoes and the ride north towards Freetown. Before we start learning the past, facing the future, and trying to realize that all those wonderful people that came before us were hard-working, conscientious human beings. Like ourselves, they were trying to make a better place for future generations to live in. We want our dreams to come true for our children so they will know a better world. I would like to have you meet Adam Belson. A year ago, I might have had a vague memory that he worked with DCTV. However, today I feel we have bridged the generation gap. As he goes out into the world after graduation, I hope he feels the same way. He is not just the guy that is trudged behind me, lugging a heavy video camera, but a fine young man with his future ahead of him. As he goes through life, I hope he will stop occasionally and reflect upon the fact that he is making history for those generations that will come after him, and do his very best to leave a good place for them. Almost as old as once upon a time, Smith Mills, located in about the central part of Dartmouth, was destined, back when the first mills were built, and through the present frenzy of growth today, to be the area where the active business of town was and is still being conducted. Nostalgic dreams are a natural part of our being, but they should not consume us to the point where we cannot see through progress. Some of the old nostalgia still exists, and we should make an effort to save what we have instead of turning a deaf ear or throwing up our hands and saying, "What a pity, it's all gone." Today we will once again walk through that part of town called Smith Mills. The oldest map I could locate, 1851, shows that the mills ended where, going south, Chase Road, now Westport Road, went up to at least the Quaker burial ground, where at one time there was a Quaker meeting house, and where Hicksville Road, now Fonts Corner Road, going north to where another Quaker cemetery is located. Going north up Hathaway Road to at least Slocum Road, and down Tucker Road as far as the Gilley Farm. As the village grew and the trolley car was introduced, Smith Mills grew. It extended from Summit Grove to Carrollton Heights on Route 6 in the early 1900s. My first introduction to Smith Mills was in 1925, when I moved here to stay with my grandmother, Estelle Peirce, where I entered the 4th grade in the Joe Best Gilley School. My parents also found an old house and were settled there a year later. Social life was built around the churches in the Smith Mills Grange, first located in Fire Station 3. The Grange was organized in 1927 with 119 charter members. By 1935, they had raised enough money to build their own hall. What fun it was in those days, the dances and shows and suppers. Eventually, membership dropped as the farms disappeared and parking became a problem. The land value shot up so high it was out of reach to buy. So they moved to share the hall with the Dartmouth Grange in Russell's Mills. This year we have merged with the Dartmouth Grange, and the young people are coming back the same as we did and the same reasons that we went there many, many years ago. Even the old-fashioned fair is returning every fall with its animals, fruit, and veggies, and the judges with the cherished ribbons ready to judge. Hawthorne Medical Clinic, set back from the road, is one of our later additions, serving the surrounding community with efficiency. Then, as we look across the highway, we follow the New Bedford Country Club as far as the top of the Smith Mills Hill, bordered by Slocum Road on the east and Hathaway Road on the west. Built in 1909, it has been a beautiful green jewel in our community. Traveling up Hathaway Road on the west side, we see houses built in the 1800s, mostly from 1850 to the 20th century. The White House with a small building beside it, the only one left of a number of such small buildings that were on the property, were tourist cabins back in 1930. People on their way to Cape Cod preferred to stop overnight in a rented room or one of the more luxurious cabins and start off fresh in the daylight. After an early supper, out of the house came the people with their chairs, hoping to snare the innocent tourists who signaled their approach by slowly driving down Route 6. Almost as a unit, everyone rose and with broad smiles tried to wave them in. More than one confrontation resulted, but looking back, I think everyone was amused. But during the Depression, it might mean the difference of what was put on the table the next day. By 8 o'clock, everyone had retired back to their houses, and the vacancy or no vacancy signs were set up. Marlin's Ice and Oil supplied most of Smith Mills. Oil was delivered in trucks in the 1930s, but I can remember the Iceman coming to stock our ice box. He always cut off extra pieces that we kids grabbed as soon as he hoisted a large chunk to his shoulder and disappeared, and we thought we had gotten away with something. As we returned to the south side of Route 6, we are standing in a small strip mall, the present location of New York Bagel and a bridal salon. Next west, on the corner of Route 6 and Tucker Road, sits the Sunoco station. Originally, there was a beautiful big house here, but when Smith Mills went, everything went. Going across to the north side of the highway, west of Anderson Way, the new Smith Mills Congregational Church is standing down the street. The Dartmouth Baptist Church, with a plaque reading 1909, was the first Christian church, located in 1838 at the corner of Old Westport Road and Route 6. First a Quaker meeting house, it later was the home of the Christian church, and as well as a Baptist church. Later, it was moved and made into a two-story house, and it still stands there today. The church, on Route 6, built in 1909, has been restored to its original simplicity, with the distinction of being the only stick church constructed in Dartmouth, another Smith Mills treasure. Next comes the fire station, now sharing with Alert Ambulance Service. Still the same after many years. I can remember hearing the bell atop the building ringing, and the volunteers as today racing to get to a fire in time. In those days, signals left a lot to be desired. There was a fire in the New Bedford Band and Tie Company on Summit Avenue in Summit Grove many years ago. By mistaking Suffolk Avenue for Summit, the building was a total loss by the time they found their mistake out back in 1928. We have always had a great volunteer group, and to this day, they would be very hard to beat. The original North Dartmouth Library has been moved, but not far, and there are plans afoot for a great use for it. Meetings have been held to see if we can't have a tourist attraction there, to an information booth, as well as have some of the historical things from Dartmouth presented there, so that people coming in will get some idea of how important Dartmouth itself was in the early days. When I was young, I spent many wonderful years reading the latest Zane Grey books in the same building. A fireplace on one of the walls is still there, and on cool fall days, many years ago, a crackling fire gave warmth to the peaceful atmosphere, good for concentrating. I only had to run across the lawn from Nana's house to get there. The White House atop the stone wall is one of the older houses in Smith Mills. Built in the early 1700s, it has been disturbed twice to widen the road for progress. It was the homestead of Benjamin Cummings, who owned many of the mills in Smith Mills at one time. It originally started out as a Cape Cod colonial, but he added a small market on the back, and when it was going to be moved the second time, my grandmother, who loved her English gardens, would not move a foot out of it, though she went without any conveniences for several days while it was turned by hand. I have forever been grateful for her English stubbornness when I enjoy the yard and watch the goldfish peacefully swimming in the pool, because if the house had been moved back once more, it would have taken most of the backyard, and she knew it, and she stuck to her original idea of having it turned so she would have her yard. The state police barracks belonged to the Champions, for whom Champion Terrace was named. Later, the Edwards, same family, lived there for a number of years. For a long time, I tried to trace the origin of Doc Smith's house. The Seabury family occupied it for a number of years. Then a new doctor came to town and bought it. Mr. Goodwin, who was a teacher of English as well as a principal at one time in New Bedford, knew him very well and suggested he come and look at the town and see if he wouldn't become our doctor. Dr. Smith was a brilliant surgeon and at one time delivered most of the babies in town, including one of mine. He took care of all the people, young and old, and many times went home with just produce because people didn't have enough money to pay him what his services were worth. He was a typical old country doctor with a Model A instead of a horse and carriage. Day or night, he was only a call away. His office was an addition to the rear of his house, and when camp time came around, we kids would line up for our annual checkup. The fee was $2, but he'd just say, with healthy youngsters like you, it was really no work. Then we would try to convince our folks we had saved the money and we would find a good use for it. When the controversy came up about the Smith house, I had numerous calls from people that remembered their mothers and grandmothers telling stories of the Underground Railroad. The runaway slaves coming from the river crossed the Smith property to the old tavern across the street. This had been demolished in the 1970s. There they were delivered, there they were sheltered until it was safe for them to go on to their destination. We only have to go back a few generations, but no one took the time to write these stories down. So now there is a lot of reference work to be done to substantiate the stories. Midas Muffler comes next, located next to the Pascomanset River, that after centuries of rushing through Dartmouth on its way to Buzzards Bay, became water power for many mills located there. The river is still there, but how many people pause to listen to its music as it flows over the dam or stand in fascination as it disappears under the road at their feet? Nostalgia is what we want to take time today to see. It's still there in many forms, but most of the time we are much too busy to take a second look. Our most recently acquired gem is a Samansky land to be used as a canoe launch and park. Many of the old mill foundations, as well as the old stone supports for a footbridge long eroded away, can still be seen. As you go to the rear of the land, ducks still lazily swim on silent water. It is a beginning of the beautification of Smith Mills. Our congratulations go to the family that has been so generous and far-sighted. Pond has done much volunteer work, planting trees and flowering shrubs along Fonts Corner Road, as well as our town officials are enforcing laws to require islands and plantings in the parking lots. The eyesore of Builder Square is gone, and the mall is joining in the effort to improve its looks. Instead of feeling sorry, join the many volunteers in town to do something. You elders, like myself, can help preserve the nostalgic memories by volunteering to relate your personal memories in story and pictures. Long before they were gone, or the children to follow us will never know the hard-working, wonderful people that came before them. We feel that we are important in what is going on in this life, but our ancestors were just as important, or we wouldn't be able to do the things that we're doing today. The jewelry store with a horse and carriage in front has been preserved by a business that cared. Soon we will have our own Stop and Shop that will cover an ugly expanse of land, but will also be very convenient for its neighbors. The two houses on the west side, beyond the mall, and the Barker house that sits grandly in the junction of Fonts Corner Road and Hicksville Road, hopefully may be preserved for more generations to come. The old Quaker cemetery, where once stood a Quaker meeting house, stands as a memorial to those people that settled in Smith Mills and worked to preserve what they had. This stands on the west side of Fonts Corner Road, where Hicksville Road turns off. We are living in a different generation, and as they had to accept changes, so should we. But let's fight to preserve what we have. So we lost the Pascomanset links, but do we say, thank goodness for the preservation of the New Bedford Country Club? We traveled to the beginning of Old Westport Road, formerly Chase Road. The little house directly behind the gas station is going to be saved because someone cared. This house once belonged to a William Thatcher, and at one time was a social hub of the community. The L at the side held a general store and post office. Built in the early 1800s, this house would have great tales to tell if it only could talk. Unfortunately, houses cannot talk, and we have to rely on people to relate their histories and their stories as well on tape and videos. If you elders who shy away from anything so public as television, write your stories or tell your children to write them down for you. DCTV or the Wanderers at COA, who is sponsoring this tape, would love to share them. Don't sit back and moan. It's too late. It's never too late. Many of the houses going south on the road originated in the 1800s. On the east side, this house is considered one of the best examples in town of a federal Cape Cod colonial. It is typical with a center door and 2 windows on each side. The Captain Otis F. Thatcher house is now used for a bed and breakfast and also on special occasions. It has been fully restored inside and out in excellent taste. As long as a home or building is occupied, it has a better chance of being in good repair than a vacant building that the weather and time will eventually destroy. Directly ahead at the junction of Chase and Old Westport Road is a large 2-storied house. It has sometimes been referred to as an inn, but I have found nothing to substantiate this theory. There are so many facts locked in older minds. Please help us to answer these questions. Directly in front on the north side is a lovely old home that in my time was owned by a gentleman named Ray Petty. He loved flowering bulbs and brought them from all over the world. And in the spring, my Aunt Helen and I would walk up there, and it seemed like a fairy garden in the hollow with its myriad of shapes and colors. Today, many of the bulbs still can be seen, and I am happy to see the old house lived in. The big white house that sits back from the road, surrounded by white fences, used to contain horses. It belonged at one time to the Howard Young family. Coming back north to the corner gas station, we proceed down Route 6 towards Tucker Road. Mr. Tuck's stands out because that once was an 1800 house. If you look real sharp as you race by, you can see that though the front has been altered, the rear of the 2-story house is much the same as it was. The next old house belonged to the Harry Goodwin family in the early 1900s. Set back from the road in gentle majesty, minus the beautiful gardens that once graced it. This was the same family that brought Dr. Smith to Smith Mills. The Goodwins had an outdoor garden party so he could be introduced to the many families he was later to serve so efficiently. This house at one time was built in another location, but one winter it was brought down the river on the ice to stand where it is at present. From the southwest corner of Tucker Road are old houses. It is too bad that they didn't have a ruling, as they have in a town in Maine, where businesses came in, utilized the old houses and locations to their advantage. You can walk down a main street there and still feel you're back in another century. This type of usage attracts people and also improves business, as well as preserve the outside of the older houses. The Job S. Gilley School, built in the 1920s, still is home for the children until they go to the middle school. Back in my time, there were 8 grades held there, and we graduated directly into Dartmouth High School. As we travel south towards the Gilley farm, there are old and new homes mixed together, but still in keeping with the architecture of an old New England town. I was told that the Eddy House, next south of the school, was once larger, but now part of a division of 2 houses. When I was going to school, we did not have a way of getting a noon lunch. We carried our lunch boxes and bag with our books and whatever we might need each day. The teachers, however, were much more fortunate because they had a way of getting hot meals. My dear friend Marion Fons, the same family that owned so much land in Hicksville, is now living in Utah. Each day her mother made home-cooked meals for the teachers, and she and her brother and sister carried them over in heavily covered baskets to keep the food warm until it was given to the teachers. Recently, Gilley School had a reunion, and it was very well attended. People exchanged stories and pictures, and I hope that they will have them more often, because the first one that they had was 5 years ago. And as we get older, we like to attend these things more often because so many of the people are also getting older. Across on the east side of the road is the now vacated post office and the library that is outgrowing its walls. The large white house in 1930s was on a farm, the barn and livestock long gone. There was also an ice house located on Connell's Pond at the rear of the farm. In the winter, after a long freeze, the ice would be drilled for depth and tested by the weight of the horses. But sometimes, even with precautions, the horses might fall in. Hay from the fields had been mowed and stacked in the house in the fall. Horses dragged wooden sleds from the pond, and the loft would be filled by hoisting the blocks of ice by ropes and pulleys, carefully packing the hay around it for insulation. And it lasted for months, in fact, well into the summer. As we end our walk through the 20th century, we'll travel back to a place that has only known peace and serenity. Hopefully, this will continue for another century and more. The Smith Mills camp meeting grounds are still much the same as when I was a young girl. About the only change is that many of the families stay in cottages and trailers instead of tents as they did many years ago. On a warm summer afternoon after the camp had closed, Aunt Helen and I would ride our bikes down there and wander around the summer cottages that are still almost the same as those many years ago. While in session, we would sit on a stone wall to listen to the gospel music. On a warm summer evening, it seemed heavenly. Let us stop for a minute and think, what can I do to help this village become a friendlier place to live in? After all, isn't it the people that can make this happen? I know Adam is tired and ready to trade his camera for something lighter, not to mention myself. Thanks to DCTV and all of the people that are already donating their time and their efforts to make Smith Mills as attractive as possible. I understand in the next year or so there are going to be many changes in Smith Mills. And the main reason for us making this video is because we would like to compare what we have today and what the future is going to bring us, which we don't know. It's an unknown quantity.